Intoxicated by the golden glow of the evening light, seduced by the cool blue hues of the dawn, I follow where the light leads. Through cobblestone alleys and down paths worn through the centuries, I wander, documenting the people and their landscapes across 5 continents. I am lured to places and people different from my rural Kentucky roots. These are the words that introduce the book Light, Color, Culture by our guest today, photographer Gregory Rust. Hi, Gregory. We've talked before, but we're going to talk with the public now. So I would just like to introduce you a little bit. You call yourself a documentary photographer, a 5th-generation Kentucky farmer, and you have been a resident of Pendleton County for a long time. How long has that been?
I've been in Pendleton County for over 30 years.
Okay.
And I'd like to first thank you for having me here at the Pendleton County Library. It's a wonderful facility.
Pendleton County is full of surprising people and hidden gems. We know it's a beautiful county, but sometimes I think we kind of don't expect some of the life experiences that the people who live here bring to bear, and you've chosen to share those with us. And you grew up in Kentucky.
I grew up in Campbell County and consider myself a 5th-generation farmer. And that's something that was a high priority for me, is to continue that farming tradition in our family. So after my grandfather's farm was sold, I looked for my own place, and we were fortunate enough to my wife and I raised our daughters here in Pendleton County.
And so the farm that we're looking at in the picture, this is your place?
Yes, we call this Gully Creek Farm. So if you, down in the valley there, it's either, when it rains a lot, it's a creek, otherwise it's a gully. And we raise horses there, and we've had some pretty nice animals that came out of there. So it's been a great family experience raising horses, and we're still doing it.
And so you said that you're a farmer. You consider yourself to be a 5th-generation Kentucky farmer, and what you farm is horses?
Yes, we raise quarter horses, and my daughters have shown them through the years, and we bred them and had some nice colts, and it's been just a passion for us to do that. So that's obviously now it's hard to be a full-time farmer. So I'm a photographer, but I consider myself a farmer to carry on the traditions of our family.
And so in this next photo, we actually get to see your daughters, and we get to see some of your horses.
Yeah, these were a couple brother and sister horses. One was a mare and one was a show gelding. And the gelding did quite well, won the state fair for the girls a couple times, and the other one was a mare that we bred. And this was also a Christmas card a few years back when the girls were much younger than they are now.
Okay, now I'm going to display my equine ignorance here. What do you call that kind of horse?
Well, they're quarter horses, but those are called flea-bit gray. So has a little speckles all over it, which they call flea bits, and we always just liked them, but they were always a pain to keep clean when you put them into the show arena.
Well, so photography is the way that you paid the bills, but I gather from previous discussions that it wasn't exactly what you always thought you would be doing. You went to NKU?
Northern Kentucky University, and I started out as a biology major. I wanted to get into wildlife management. That's how photography really started with me. I thought I'd be taking pictures of wildlife within the environment. That was really one of my main loves. But chemistry and biology didn't exactly do very well in the classroom there. So I thought the next thing that I'm interested in is Native American. So I started studying anthropology.
Anthropology. And did you study photography along with that?
So I received my degree in anthropology, but I kept taking photography along with that, thinking that it would help me with field work. So I took all the courses. I took half dozen photography courses at NKU, a fantastic art department there, which I was in. And actually, this is a photograph that I made when I was in college. Back in '78, I decided that I wanted to go out and see how the Native Americans really were, and I joined a walk. It was called the Longest Walk, which originated in California, went to D.C., and the Native Americans were raising issues about problems that were plaguing, land rights, mining rights, water rights, and they went up to Washington and presented these. And this was a fairly famous photo, so to speak, because it's Ted Kennedy there debating with some of the American Indian movement leaders.
And he's debating, so you can see some tension in the photograph.
Well, there was a lot of frustration. 1970s, the American Indian movement had just started, and a lot of frustration with getting their point across and getting their issues out to the public. And Ted Kennedy was one of the few politicians that actually came out to meet with them, and they were all over him. As you can see, nobody's listening, everybody's talking. This is Russell Means right here, that's his hands up talking with Senator Kennedy there, and it was quite an animated conversation.
So you originally were studying anthropology, and that was born of your interest in your sympathy for the Native Americans' civil rights movement. And so you originally were thinking of photography as a tool that would help you in some
Correct.
other profession.
That's the way I thought it would be. And then I wrote a paper about this 3-month journey I had with the Native Americans back in '78, and it was accepted to an anthropology conference, which was a big deal. And I went down and presented my paper and brought a slideshow along. Had all of these PhDs and professors sitting in the room, and they all applauded. And I handed out my paper. They left the room, and all my papers were sitting on the tables. And my photographs, I decided, were what really worked. And this photograph here is the photograph that I decided was going to launch me into a career as a photographer.
I mean, it must have been a frustrating moment to have your audience almost dismissing the bulk of your work. But this is a powerful picture.
Well, I was just a student. I was 21 years old presenting to these PhDs in anthropology about my idea of Native Americans, and I was really hitting hard about you need to listen to them and quit going down there and telling them how to run their reservations in their life, and listen to them and see what they have to say. And they probably didn't like a whole lot what I was saying particularly, and that was what was in my paper. But this image here, this little guy, at the time, his dad was one of the co-founders of the American Indian movement, and you can see that he reacted to my camera in this way.
So this is something that we've talked about. This is not a posed photograph. This isn't something you asked him to do.
I did not ask him to do this. I asked to take his picture, and he did the solidarity shot in front of the teepee. So for my work that I do when I'm working in the streets, I don't pose images. People react to my camera, and that's completely different than if I was in an editorial setting where I'm posing people for a shot and trying to make a photograph to work with a magazine article or something like that.
So this is a moment that told you that photography was going to be your way of communicating about something that was important to you, pursuing
Well, I would
as
have
a
had to
profession.
continue in it to get a PhD, and then there's no guarantee you're going to get a job after you've spent another 4 or 5 years working on that. But I did realize that it was brought to my attention you had a pretty good talent with a camera, so I thought I can get a job with this, and I went out and started doing photography for a living. I started doing portraits and working for a company, and then started doing other types of photography that led me on to over 40 years of staying in the business.
Then from there you moved into sports photography. This photo, of course, isn't a sports photography photo. This is Xavier University.
That's where I worked for 36 years. I started there as a photographer at Xavier, and then I moved up to be director for photography. I worked in the communications department, the PR department, and evolved through the years. I was there to make Xavier look good and a place for people to want to go to. And along with that was obviously sports. So I covered a lot of sports. Both of my daughters received a degree at Xavier University at 90% free tuition.
But in this photo, these are not your daughters. This is another candid photo that you took.
Yes, most of the image, well, not all the image. I did a lot of pose shots, but I always enjoyed grabbing the candid moment, that decisive moment. These were kids they were heading into graduation, and it was just, it was just a lot of energy and fun there. It wasn't posed. They were just walking into there. They saw me, and then they reacted. Like, I did a lot of studio work with the basketball team, all the teams really. The basketball team's obviously Xavier's biggest sports team, and I'd have them into my studio, and I'd crank the music up and get them loose. And this was a shot that I absolutely loved because I had the music cranked up. They were dancing. I threw the ball in there, and I just made that shot. You can see it isn't composed it was kind of a quick shot when my lights are in it, but I really loved the shot. I was trying to get it published in the media guide, but the coach at the time thought they were having too much fun. He didn't want to show his players having too much fun. But I love the image, just the spontaneity of the shot.
So there's sort of two sides to what you do then. But these are the photos that spoke to you. These are also the photos that spoke to me. Whenever you see team lineups, everybody always looks so serious and tough. You can tell this is a bunch of college-age guys having a good time.
And that's why the coach didn't want it in the media. This was a studio shot. This is David West. He was one of the Xavier players who made it into the NBA and made quite an impact. This is his senior year, and we did a whole photo session with him. Actually, some of these shots ended up in the New York Times. They were doing features on different potential NBA players at the time, and we just did a shoot with him. And David was a heck of a good guy.
Was this one of the ones that you went on to be able to use, or was this more of a candid moment?
No, this one was one of the ones that I liked out of the session. I did tight ones and gave him a whole lot of different images. I don't even remember exactly which image they used, but it was a photo that I liked. It kind of shows his vulnerability.
So you took photographs for Xavier, but we are in Kentucky, so of course we have to move on to some UK.
Yeah, the NCAA tournament was always the best time of the year almost for me, because you'd sit there on Selection Sunday and see where you were going to end up. And I was always thrilled to see if we'd be in a bracket where Kentucky would be, because being from Kentucky, almost all of us are Kentucky fans except for the few that live in Louisville. And I got to see Patino and Tubby and Calipari. I got to see all their teams in tournaments. So I got some of the best seats in the house, sitting on the court photographing UK basketball. People might say, well, you didn't get to have a beer and a hot dog. I said, I'll sit on the court any day. This was at one of the tournaments. I think they were playing Indiana here. It was an NCAA tournament. It was just the fact of being able to be at a UK game. I would go into the game and I'd have a UK T-shirt on and a Xavier shirt over top of it. So I had both teams represented. It was great fun. But Xavier never ended up playing UK. We got in the same bracket several times, but somebody would win, somebody would lose, and I never got to see UK and Xavier on the court, which is my ultimate game.
So are you still watching for that, waiting for that to happen? Oh yeah,
that would be the best game of the life. I don't know who. I guess I would just root the whole game.
So, but now at UK, you have encountered some maybe unexpected faces.
Yeah, UK. Obviously, Ashley Judd was a constant on the sideline for years. I mean, she was in the stands and always considered one of UK's biggest fans. And I don't remember which tournament this was, but I was down on the court in my photo position. I saw her up in the stands, so I was quite a ways from her. So I thought, oh my goodness, Ashley Judd. Every guy in Kentucky kind of had a crush on her. So I started taking pictures of her, and I'm shooting several shots, and it ended up giving me a special moment with Ashley. She saw me taking the pictures, and she looked over and she just glared at me. She was livid. She didn't want me taking her picture. I don't know if it was because of that hat she had on or what, but if looks could kill, I was a goner. And the UK photographer, he leans over to me and goes, "We don't take pictures of Ashley." I said, "Oh, well, first time I ever got to see her." So that was like, all right, move on. Bill Murray, his son, coached at Xavier for several years, and when he came into the games, it was always great fun because he would come in and everybody knew that Bill was in the stands, and he always went to the tournament games. And my favorite tournament actually would go up to the Big East tournament up in New York, and he would be up there, and he was our answer to Ashley Judd for a couple years, but obviously not as cute.
Well, I don't know.
Yeah.
I mean, he was the love interest in Ghostbusters.
Yeah, that's right. I liked him in Groundhog Day.
Oh, that's one of my favorites. So this is your photography experience at the collegiate level, sort of both as a professional and then also sort of the gleeful side as a sports fan. But that's not the only sports photography that you did. You also were a photographer for the Cincinnati Reds and the Cincinnati Bengals.
Yeah, I was pretty much had some of the best jobs in Cincinnati. I covered the Reds for 32 seasons, Bengals for 25, Xavier there for 36 years. So for years I had season tickets, so to speak, to every sporting event in Cincinnati, and it was I was fortunate, a little lucky to be able to do that, but you also have to be good at the same time. When you have these big guys, they're always wanting to get photos made of them, but typically a photo shoot you would maybe get 10 minutes if you were lucky. I mean, it's like, okay, you got him for 10 minutes, make your photo and go. So I knew I had to make this photo of him with a cheetah for a zoo calendar. I'm thinking, oh my gosh, how am I going to do this photo? I got a cheetah. I've got Griffey, who doesn't like to spend a whole lot of time in photo sessions. And the PR guy for the Reds goes, "You got 10 minutes. You got to make the photo." I'm like, oh my gosh, how am I going to do this? So luckily I had a really nice-looking young lady as an assistant for me and at Xavier, and she happened to love baseball. I asked her if she would like to accompany me on the shoot. So I brought her down and I introduced her to Griff. And I said, "Griff, I know you're catching a plane, and we have a couple minutes to get this photo made." And I said, well, let's get it done. He's talking to my assistant and smiling, and he goes, "It's a charter. It'll wait. You guys long at the time as you want." So I ended up shooting with him for about a half hour.
So this is the sports-focused side of the job. You said this one was for a zoo calendar. What about this one?
This was just shooting a game. That might be Billy Hamilton bunting the ball. I mean, just action shots. You always had a multi-tier aspect to when you were shooting just about anything. I mean, you had your story that you knew you had to get. Sometimes you had a cover photo you were worrying about. You always had to be looking out for the action shot that are your typical shots, your quote Sports Illustrated moments. But then I would always have to try to get any new rookie that stepped onto the field. So it was a multi-tier whenever I covered an event, trying to get all the different aspects of the game covered to fans, as you saw with people in the stands too, on the playing field.
Okay, so there's calendar shots and there's action shots, and then there's this. He looks like he's celebrating?
Yeah, this is Todd Frazier. It was one of the best moments in Great American Ballpark history. During the All-Star game, Todd Frazier won the home run derby, and this is him celebrating. And it was always great to get to know these guys a little bit. Todd, one of the nicest guys you'd ever want to meet. Sean Casey, same way, just really good guy. So that was one of the fun parts about my job, is getting to know some of these guys. And this home run shot kind of reminds me of one of my first photo shoots with Eric Davis. And Eric Davis, back in the early 90s, was one of the premier baseball players in the league. And I had to do a little studio shot of him. And I brought him in, and I was nervous. I just started with the Reds, and here's like superstar Eric Davis. So I sat him down, and I said, "Oh, Okay, Eric, I said, we're going to take several shots here. Just make sure we get a good one. And he just stared at me and said, if you were any good, you'd get it right the first time.
Oh, wow.
And I just turned around to Eric and I said, Eric, you hit a home run every time you come to the plate. And he was he started biting his lip, and then he just busted out laughing. He goes, all right, dude, that's a good one. Let's do it. So to this day, if I see Eric, he now calls me the old timer.
And okay, so I've given a few shots of the baseball side of things, but we don't want to leave out the football side of things.
Yeah, I got to cover the Bengals for many years, and this one I just put in because it's got the GOAT in it, Brady, the greatest of all time. It's not the greatest maybe sports photography, but it was a great moment because it was raining so hard when I was taking this shot, and I'm all covered up and I have rain gear on, and I just have to get Brady in. I mean, get to be on the same field with somebody like that. So football was not my passion, but it was a lot of fun to shoot.
What this looks like is, the hard part of the job for the players.
He was driving down the field at that time towards the end of the game, and it was raining so hard. I mean, you could hardly even see across the field, and I really think that the rain helped us beat the Patriots that day.
There's a couple more here that we had talked about before, and you said to me that this one had too much going on in the background. But it does capture some action.
Well, always trying to get action shots, and that's nice. The ball's in the shot. He's probably not going to catch it at this point. Looks like he's already been hit. There's a lot going on. That's kind of the way football is. You got cheerleaders, you got photographers in the background. It's a little bit more difficult of a game to shoot because you really have to isolate the imagery.
This is the action shot that you picked.
I picked it because this one I said is a little more isolated. You can go right to it and see what's going on. And A.J. Green was one of my favorite players of all time with the Bengals. Total professional on and off the field. He always acted like he'd been there before. You didn't see him doing a whole lot of dancing and acting up. And if I ever asked him to do something in a photo, we would do it. It's a pretty good looking shot just because of the way the ball's on his fingertips, and who knows if he didn't get walloped the next instant.
So that's the sports focused side of things. And you must have taken hundreds of photos. What were you focused in on with images like this?
Well, whenever I mentioned before, I had a multi-tier. When I go into a game, it's almost like playing three-dimensional chess. You have what you need to get for that next particular program, or you have that needs to go up on social media. You have those things that are needed right away, and then you have to always be looking out for individual shots of players to try to get everyone documented. But then I would always be looking out for images that I found artistic and just interesting images that were not your typical Sports Illustrated or Media Guide or imagery like that. And those are the images I like because not as many people would try to get them. I mean, typically people don't cut somebody's face in half when they do the photo, but he was that close to me, and that's the way I composed it, and I like it. That's Brandon Phillips. He was a second baseman for the Reds. Now this is Joe Burrows. This was my highlight shot from the Super Bowl year. That year, this was my last photo shoot with the Bengals. Actually, I ended up going on the injured list shortly after this, and ended up retiring from all of my photography business. But so this is my highlight shot of headshots for the year. That was the Super Bowl year. So that was Joe, and smiling this year, but the year before he was a rookie, and he just, as all rookies do, stay deadpan and try to look tough. But a year later, he was all smile.
So there is definite humanity in these photos. This is a celebratory moment.
Well, this was the Reds back in after they had won a pennant back in 2012 or something like that, and that's one of the highlights is when you get to go in and be in the celebration in the clubhouse. This is Homer Bailey. He opened a 24-ouncer on me and just totally drenched me on this shot. And I stood my ground and I took it. And you go in there, I have a raincoat on and hat, and my camera's all wrapped in plastic, but this one here was a direct hit to my lens, and the Reds actually had to repair that lens because he gummed it up pretty good. And these are some of these other types of photos. These I call my art photos of baseball, just quirky little moments. This is Lou Piniella, opening day, probably about 1991. It's actually one of my favorite behind-the-scenes shots of the Reds. You've got the chaos of the zoo animals, and then you got Lou blowing a bubble, and then you got Greg Horde there acting so casually, just leaning up against an elephant. This just makes me laugh. If nobody else does, it at least makes me happy.
The lighter side of sports photography, the candid moments. What about this one? This one really grabbed my attention as I was going through. He's looking straight at me.
Well, this is Mike Trout, one of the best players in the game, and he had just hit a home run, and I'm standing at the end of the dugout in the photo well, and after he went down and gave high fives to everybody, he just kept walking down the dugout, and I just stayed focused on him and shot until he was like literally a couple feet away from me. It's just a nice image of showing his intensity, but it's also cool just seeing him up close and personal like that in a non-baseball traditional shot. This is Joey Votto. He's going to turn 40 this year. He's 39 right now, and he's been with the Reds his whole career. And possible Hall of Famer, probable Hall of Famer. And this is one of my favorite shots of Joey because Joey was so intense for years. You couldn't get him smiling. It was always on my notes for games. Try to get pictures of Joey smiling because he was so intense and so focused, you didn't see it. This photo was just a couple years ago. You see Jonathan India there. And Joey smiling and acting crazy like this is one of my favorite photos of him because it took me about 15 years to get it.
And then we're going to see somebody we'll be familiar with.
Yeah, good old Nate Jones. He finally, our Pendleton County MLB star, he had a great career, and unfortunately 2020 was the year that he played for the Reds, and 2020 was the COVID year, so very few of us Pendleton County folk got to see him play in person. So I was thrilled to be able to see him and be in the stadium and make photos of him. And during those games, I had to be up farther in the stand, so it's a different camera angle than usual. But it was great to see Nate do his thing in Cincinnati.
And the next person that we're going to see is a sports figure. But tell me about where photography took you throughout your life.
Well, I tend to say my camera was like key to the world. Here I am, a quote Kentucky farmer. That's being generous with the farming part, but but basically, without the camera, I wouldn't have met these people or got to see the places that I've seen. It's just been a fantastic journey for me. So one of the things I wanted to do was, being a huge Reds fan, I wanted to get in and do photos of the Reds. So this was before I was the Reds photographer, and I was able to get a credential to go down to the stadium. It was my first time being on the field, and Pete Rose was my ultimate hero. He was a Cincinnati kid. He was Charlie Hustle. He was the way I liked baseball to be played. I walked out on the field down at Riverfront Stadium, and there was Pete Rose standing there at the batting cage. He was player manager at the time. And I lifted my camera to take a picture, and I started shaking. I got buck fever, just like people would be out deer hunting. I couldn't even hold the camera steady. I was shaking. My knees were wobbly. I literally had to go over and sit down in the dugout for about 10 minutes and compose myself, because there I was standing in front of one of my idols. So I did get my act together. This was Pete leaning against the batting cage, and made this one of my very early pictures that I ever did down at the stadium.
Now, is this one in black and white because of the timing, or is it in black and white
because
that was the composition?
Back in the late 80s, black and white was predominantly what I was shooting. Black and white was, many publications didn't do color because of the expense. And I shot almost all black and white for half of my career. I loved shooting black and white, but that just happened to be what I enjoyed shooting at the time, was black and white.
Here's another couple images of somebody that even I recognized, LeBron.
Yeah, LeBron James. That was another one of the greatest of all times. I was lucky enough to shoot a couple games that he was in, and pretty much shot the whole game just of him. This was him just sitting on the bench at one point, contemplating, just kind of an introspective moment of LeBron, someone who I gained a lot of respect for after seeing him in person. So I was able to get a good shot of him at the game too. So I got my introspective shot, and I got my LeBron slam dunk, which was made my LeBron experience fulfilled.
And sports figures aren't the only players that your time with photography puts you next to.
Yeah, I got to be on the stage with the players for a lot of the political people through the years. I've photographed half dozen of the presidents through the years, and I like this one of Bush. He was down at the stadium. He threw out a first pitch. He was president here at the time, and Joe Nuxall, he just walked up because Bush was a big baseball fan, so he knew Nuxall. And much to the chagrin of the Secret Service, Nuxie walks up and just gives him a big bear hug. And it's just one of those moments where it was so fun just to be in the presence of the President of the United States and see such a human element.
And here's someone that most of us will recognize.
This was one of my. What was a real highlight for me is being able to see the Dalai Lama. He came to Cincinnati to give a talk, and I got to cover him received a crest credential from Xavier University, and the Dalai Lama, after his talk, came out, and I got to shake his hand right after this. I mean, it was like one of the coolest moments ever to be able to shake the Dalai Lama's hand.
So a lot of people that you got to meet and take pictures of, they came here, but I think you told me this one you went to Rome?
This was one where I was invited to go to Italy with some Xavier professors, and they got to meet the Pope. And my whole reason for going to Italy was to get this photograph. So then that's a lot of pressure, you know. So, and luckily, this was about 2 frames before the people in the suits closed in around them, and I was able to get the photograph. So my trip to Italy for Xavier paid off, and this ended up being one of the covers of their magazine.
What about this one? Is this one that you personally took, or?
This was one when I was up in New York for the Big East tournament, and our students, we would go out and take our students who were up there as fans and take them out to see the city. And this was obviously a pretty important place to see at ground zero. Mm-hmm. And when you go to a place like that, it's pretty overwhelming when you stand there and realize the history that happened there. And I wanted to make a photo there that would really showed how impactful this place was.
And I know you've taken this one with a special lens. I think you called it a fisheye lens. But it's almost all of New York turns in and focuses in on this one special memorial. And we've got the ground, the memorial, and then there's also the sky and the light. And light and color are 2 of the things that you have been focused on when it comes to your personal photography journey. This next photo is on the cover of your book, Light, Color, Culture. As I was looking at things, the impression I had here is of what's going on the ground and in the background, where everything looks a little bit weathered, everything looks a little bit worn. And then that reflection that's actually on the ground in a puddle, but it reflects the sky. Can you tell me your thoughts about this picture?
I chose this for the cover of my book, Light, Color, Culture, because it pretty much sums it up all in one photograph. You have the light, you have the color, and you have the cultural aspect of it. And the cultural, this was made in Cuba. So this was one of those mornings where I would just go out and literally follow where the light led me in the streets, and I came across this puddle, and I thought, oh my gosh, this is too good to pass up. So I literally stood here and I shot for 15 minutes because what I was waiting to do, trying to get, was an old car coming through the background, because Cuba's known for the vintage vehicles that they have over there. So I shot and I shot and I shot, and then when this gentleman came riding through in the foreground, that's when I knew I made the shot. It was just pretty much summed up the title of my book, Light Color Culture.
But you haven't always photographed in color. When you started out, everything was black and white. But some of the photographs we're going to take a look at next are not black and white because they are some of your earlier photographs. They were a deliberate decision. Mostly, would you say that most of your photography is in color?
Now I would say most of my photography is in color because that's what was demanded in my profession. I had to really learn color photography. Black and white photography to me was always easier to make art photography, so to speak. It had to be good black and white photography where you were utilizing shadows and composition, but the black and white was easier for it to look artistic because people don't see every day in black and white. So when someone sees a black and white photo, to me, I think it becomes a little more artistic. And for the first 20 years of my life, I shot all black and white. I loved black and white. I still love black and white, but the industry dictated where I went with it. And in those days, I was doing all my own development and darkroom work. It was before computers, so I never printed much in color. I did a little bit, but my real passion was black and white, and I did that for years. This is a self-portrait that I put in my book, Light Color Culture, and I'm over in Nepal. And what makes a good photo is it has many dimensions. So you have the photo of the self-portrait of me in the mirror, then you have an old woman in the background, and then you have a young woman in the foreground, and then in the shadows there's another woman standing back in the back. So your eye travels all around this. Again, I was over in Nepal here, and I was shooting, at that time I was shooting all film. So I was shooting either black and white or I was shooting color. And this was a day I would happen to be shooting black and white, and it just, these kids saw me, and this is how they reacted to me. It's just, to me, a nice black and white photo.
What caught my attention about this specific one is the clothes that they're wearing. There's a lot of different places that this could come from, and until this moment, I didn't know that this was also taken in Nepal. There's sort of a universality to some of your photographs.
And that's intentional on my part. We're going to talk more about the book later, how I edited and how I selected images for that. This is a young woman also in Nepal, and this may have been the same day because I was shooting black and white. And this happened to be very early in the morning, so I had to be shooting black and white because the color, there wasn't enough light to even use color film. And this photograph happens to be in my book, Light Color Culture, even though it's a black and white image, because I just really liked this photo a lot, and I had never published her before, and I wanted her in it. I can still see it as if I was there. That was a blue blanket around her, and she was kind of just looking at me across the way in the marketplace. Just a candid moment.
This one also has a good story.
That was in Nicaragua. I was in Nicaragua 3 times, and Xavier had students who went down to Nicaragua for service learning. And so we would always go to the same barrio, and this woman actually made a cover of Xavier magazine again as a representative of a trip to Nicaragua. And she was just taking a break at a soup kitchen where our students lived, where they worked.
You try to capture candid images when you're taking your own photography. You try to capture candid and unmanipulated images, and you tried to duplicate this photo, and it just didn't work.
I came back a couple years later with the magazine as the cover. She was the cover girl of our magazine. We went back to the soup kitchen, and I gave her the magazine. She was all thrilled that she was on the cover. And I said, well, let's do this picture again. So we went over, and she sat down, and the wall was different. The wall was yellow and orange. The light wasn't the same. I had sat her down and asked her to look at me, and it was completely different from the moment where I shot this one, where it was just a moment in time. When I tried to duplicate it a couple years later, it just didn't work. Wasn't even worth showing.
What about this little girl?
And this young lady's in Nicaragua. She's in the barrio where I would live, and I just find her kind of angelic, almost Madonna-like, where she's not really looking at me. You can't really tell if she's smiling or what the expression is. I just think she's really beautiful.
Now, this next one, we've chosen a lot of photos that are focused in on people, but this one really gets to the color and the culture. This
was in Nepal, and Nepal is predominantly Hindu, but this was a Buddhist shrine in Nepal, and these were huge statues I always go out in the morning to photograph, so you can see this wonderful fog enshrouding them. And the tourists called this Monkey Temple. If you can look close at this, and you have a hard time seeing it in this photo, but there's 7 or 8 monkeys in this photo. They're dotted all through here, and that's just an added little part of this. But it's the mystical feel of the Buddhist shrine in the fog that I love.
And you had to, I think you told me a lot of the time, you had to seek morning light and evening light. Is that one of the things that made black and white easier to take?
That's the difference to me between good color and the black and white photography. Color photography, I would literally shoot the first hour of the day and the last hour of the day, maybe an hour and a half, because you had the golden hour, which everybody has heard about, and then the early morning light, which this is, where it's this cool bluish glow. It's the color temperature of the film. Once the sun rises and the angle rises of the light, you don't get the same quality of light. And as the day would go on, the images, even though I may be shooting digital, I could still shoot during the day, but I would tend to convert them into black and white.
And these days, everything is digital.
Film photography is basically obsolete. I compare it to using a tintype. Tintypes were the old metal photos they used back at the beginning of photography that went obsolete in the late 1800s. Digital photography is wonderful. You know what you got. You have a shoot. You know what you have. You see it right away. You can wrap it up. Now with digital, you can make the photo see that you've got it and say, okay, let's go do something else. So at first the quality was not very good, but now the quality of digital is phenomenal, and to me it's the only way to go.
And we all know about Photoshop, so it's easy to take an image and completely change it, but that's something where the photographer is the one who brings the integrity to digital photography, and your goal has been to capture images that you can leave alone. You don't need to manipulate them to let them speak for themselves. There's some process involved.
This is in the Grand Tetons, and again, out early in the morning, you get the beautiful light. You've got that bluish glow to it, and you make these images, and there's nothing wrong with photographers who go out and manipulate in Photoshop. Some photographers will take 5 images, blend them together to make a final product. I feel like with this AI and everything coming on, it should say under that photo manipulated with AI, or photo a multiple layer. When I put images out there, I intentionally say that it's an unmanipulated image. And when I say unmanipulated, it means that I didn't take these mountains and put them in this photograph and take the foreground and put it in separately. This is what was in front of me. I may lighten it or darken it a little bit, but I am not manipulating the image.
What about this one? I just love the birds.
I first got into photography because I liked wildlife, and I still like wildlife. The environment is a huge issue with me. And these birds were just so playful in the way they are in the photograph. Your eyes bop around the photograph. They go from one bird to the next. And a good photo, to me, your eye has to travel around it. You don't want to take what you see so often is a picture of a flower with a bee dead set in the middle like a target. That's not, to me, a good photo, because your eye goes right to it and that's it. when you have an image where your eye roams around it, makes for a much more interesting image.
Now this looks like maybe, is this that afternoon, that
So
evening
this
light?
is that evening golden hour where you get this incredible warmth to the image, where the sun's, you can see that the angle's real low. It's the shadows are angling across the image, and the color on the ship, I think that's Shiprock. It's one of them. It's in Monument Valley. In the background, you can see that beautiful glow to it. I mean, it may have been that color, but it was really emphasized with the setting sun. And that raven flew in there and plopped down.
So with wildlife photography, it's about timing, it's about lenses, it's about a little bit of luck, but a lot of your personal photography and the focus of the book was that light, color, and culture, specifically culture and people. And when we met before, you called yourself a cultural chameleon. Tell me about that and your specific goal when you're photographing other cultures.
What I mean by being a cultural chameleon means that I want to go into a culture and blend in. A chameleon changes its color according to where it is in the environment. And when I would be fortunate enough to be invited to these different countries, I didn't want to go in like a paparazzi and cameras firing all the time and being the center of attention. I wanted to go in, blend in, and see what the culture would give to me. It's extremely important to me to go into these cultures and listen, learn, and observe.
What did you want to convey about those people?
What I wanted to do is photograph in these different countries with portraying the people with dignity and respect, to show the people in a good light. It's pretty easy to go into very impoverished countries, and many European Western photographers go in and they'll see the sewer in the streets, they'll see the starving children, and really zero in on some of the obvious, really horrendous things that are in those cultures. To me, I found it extremely rewarding to go in and see the beauty of the culture.
Like with these young girls, they're wearing very distinctive clothing. There's some companionship in the way that their bodies are posed. What can you tell me about these girls?
Well, this is in Guatemala. Guatemala is one of my favorite places to visit. I've been lucky enough to be invited down there with a local group called the Cooperative for Education, and they bring books and computers into Guatemala, and their theme is to break the cycle of poverty. So we would go into these back rural areas, and Guatemala is extremely beautiful because it's extremely isolated. And this particular village, you can see what the indigenous clothing that the women have on. It's called a huipil, and each particular village had its own style of huipil. So the motif would be sometimes birds, sometimes geometric, and each village had its own style, and that represented the village where they came from, and they wore those with great pride, and they wore them every day. Mark Twain said one time, he said, travel is fatal to prejudice, bigotry, and narrow-mindedness.
So maybe one of the things that you photographed when you photographed other cultures was people just being people in ways that are universal no matter where you are. These boys are playing something that looks kind of like baseball.
Well, this is in Nicaragua. In Nicaragua, baseball is huge because Nicaragua is where Roberto Clemente died going to after an earthquake back in the 70s. So they've always had a real love for baseball. And these guys were out in the barrio playing. I mean, they have a homemade stick there, and they have a homemade ball. Was like had a core, and then was like cloth wrapped around it in twine, and just the love of the game in this. That's what's really evident in this image.
These same guys, are these the same kids mugging for the camera?
Those were the same kids. After the game was over, they just turned around and I didn't pose this. My Spanish was so minimal that I could ask them to take a photo, and then this is their pose that they gave to me. I mean, just to see the joy in their faces and the love of baseball. I mean, obviously my love for sports carried into a lot of my work on the road.
And you didn't only photograph children. I love this woman's face.
And this Doña Francisca, she was the matriarch of the barrio that I would visit in Nicaragua, which I was fortunate enough to go to 3 times. And she just recently passed at 103 years old. But I was over there one morning and just having a conversation, and there was a Spanish teacher with me, so she was translating. But this is Doña Francisco offering me a mango, and which I took home and ate for lunch.
What about this man?
He's called a yogi, and he's over in Nepal. He's a Hindu priest, and he was sitting in front of a temple. There were these huge old temples all around Nepal, and you just roam around the streets. That was the most exotic place I ever was, because you would turn the corner and you never knew what you would see. I mean, cows over there, they were not eaten, but they would just be walking down the streets in the middle of the city, and then you'd turn another corner and there'd be a man like this sitting at a temple. I mean, it was an amazing country, full of color. I mean, I always told people you could walk around there with your eyes closed and make good photos.
A lot of these images, some of them we see people dressed just like you would expect to see people dressed walking down the street in any typical town in the U.S., and then sometimes we see something that's very different, very cultural. I think what I noticed about this woman is, first of all, she's wearing something that you could see somebody in Cincinnati, a business person in Cincinnati wearing, but I liked her face.
This is in Ghana. It was a small village that we were staying not too far from, and I would go to the village in the morning and make photographs, and I got permission from one of the elders in the village, and so people knew I was there, and I would just kind of roam around. And I had very little knowledge of this language, but I knew enough to say, please, thanks, can I take your photo? And this lady was just kind of, found out I was quite a novelty for her to see, and she just had been that little broom in her hand. She was sweeping the front porch of her home, and just stopped, and I grabbed that shot.
There's dignity in these other places, and there's beautiful, vibrant color. Tell me what's happening here.
That's the pride of their culture. This was in Cuba, and it was actually pretty fortunate. I was able to, we went to a little concert and the Buena Vista Social Club, and these old guys in the background, literally the older people. It's one of the groups that's been around for years playing the music in Cuba, and this was just a couple performers in the band, so to speak, dancing, and it's just again showing the joy and dignity and love of their culture.
Well, what about this one?
School children. I was in Ghana. I met a man early in one day when I was out walking the streets, and he had a Harvard t-shirt on. And I walked up to him, I said, Harvard? And he spoke really good English, and he said, yeah, I went to Harvard. And I said, what? And he was the superintendent of schools, and he went over to Harvard for a summer for a workshop. So he had been to Harvard, and we struck up a conversation. So he would invite me over to his house after I was finished shooting in the morning, and we would have breakfast in the backyard. He would have breakfast, and his home was in the back behind the school. So all the school kids would come over and look at me because I was a bit of a rarity in the area. And so this is just the opposite of what you think. It's not me looking out at them. It's all these kids coming over to look at the foreigner in their neighborhood, which I love.
This girl is just beautiful, and there's almost fierceness in her face.
And this is where I go back into the dignity and pride of these areas. I mean, they were dirt poor. I mean, this was in Ghana, and this photo probably took. I was just walking down the street. Took a couple seconds to make this photo where they just stopped to look at me, and I asked if I could take the picture, and I snapped this shot. But the dignity and the beauty of her is what is just so amazing to me. When I took these photos of these different countries, I would, and I put them in the book, I would match them up, not by country, because I don't consider this a travel book, but I consider it an art book. So I would take the images of, say, an image from Ghana, match it up from an image from Nicaragua because of the light and the color and everything that matched up. And I didn't give them any dates or specific times or anything about the photo. I wanted to let it be a bit ambiguous and let your emotion feed out off the photos.
We have this young lady looking so solemn, so serious, almost fierce. I like this one because he looks like he's just told a joke. No language between us, but it was again him looking at me like, who is this guy walking through our village? And you can see the background, you can see the poverty in there, but you can see the pride in this kid's face. That piece of cloth was probably made by someone in his family, and I just love the smile that he alludes there. So obviously your photography has taken you all over the world.
Yeah, some of the highlights, that I've gotten to do. This is in Havana with one of my best friends in the whole world. He was former dean of the College of Business at Xavier, and we rented this 48 Buick, had a six-pack of beer and smoking Cuban cigars and cruised through Havana for an hour. So
your photography was your key to the world. It was also your key to some pretty special moments during COVID.
Yeah, this was when you really felt special as a photographer was during COVID, because during the Reds games it was a shortened season, and in the whole stadium there was only a handful of people there, period. And in the stands there was probably 20 photographers and video people, and that was it. We were the only people in the stadium. Then they put these cardboard cutouts out there, and it was one of the rare times where we weren't in the dugout shooting because you weren't allowed to be near the players because of COVID. We had to be so many feet back. But this is just given, kind of whimsical of me having the stadium to myself shooting a Major League Baseball game. This may have been one of the games that Nate was in.
And your photography has introduced you to some famous people.
Well, just my love of baseball. This is one of my favorite pictures of all time. A friend of mine shot this after one of the celebrations for winning the pennant. That's Brandon Phillips giving me a head full of beer there. And Gregorio, he was a up-and-coming rookie that year, and he ended up going to be a star with the Yankees. But I always tell people that I want to have as my obituary picture.
But of all of those things, what would you say is the most important achievement or the most important door that your photography has opened to you?
The most important for me, professionally but mainly personally, is my work with the Cheyenne tribe in Montana. The Cheyenne are in southeastern Montana, and they live on a reservation there. Native Americans in this country have had as bad a history as anybody. I mean, we took the land from them, all of their land. We tried to take their culture, force them into reservations, but they persist and they live on. But I've been so fortunate that I have great friends out there, and the Limberhand family in particular has pretty much taken me in as one of their own, and I can go out there to the Cheyenne Reservation and feel accepted. And to me, that is the greatest honor of my life. Because you look at this photograph here, this is made only about 30 miles from the Battle of the Little Bighorn. That's where the Cheyenne, Lakota, and Arapaho took on Custer. And when I first was out there and I see all these Marines and soldiers and sailors, I'm like, how can you guys join the Army that literally wiped out some of your ancestors? And the one Marine in the picture there, Winfield Russell, he said to me, he goes, "We're still fighting for our country. It's just under a different flag. We have a warrior tradition here, and we are going to fight for our country."
What's this next photograph?
Well, the Cheyenne and the Plains tribes in general also have a tradition of horsemanship. Some of the greatest horsemen and women of the Plains were from these tribes who were following the buffalo, bison. And so to this day, rodeos and horses are extremely important to that culture.
Something that Kentucky could relate to?
Yeah, that was my original link to the Cheyenne. I was out west and I had a Kentucky quarter horse hat on, and I met my friend Dennis at breakfast one day because he said, "Well, you got horses?" He goes, "We got horses." And we started talking horses. And the next thing I know, he invites me to the Cheyenne Reservation, and I've been back numerous times. And in fact, I'm going back in a couple weeks.
In this next picture, what I noticed is there is a tight hold to traditional culture, but there's also a lot of stuff that is just sort of a typical modern American living room.
Well, there's a real duality to modern Native American life. I mean, this is one of the Limberhand family members who I stay with. This is Sissy. She happens to be in a wheelchair where she's confined since birth, and but look at how sweet she looks, and just the wonderful look on her face. But you can see the duality of the cultures. You see a modern TV news anchor there with a native painting over top of it. There's a little flag in the picture. And so what this picture really shows is that they don't live in teepees anymore. They're just like we are. Many of them are lawyers, PhDs, work in many different types of professions, and are doing quite well for themselves.
You can find that common ground if you look for it.
This was a good friend, Leroy Whiteman. He was an artist, fantastic Cheyenne artist. I've got several of his pieces. He didn't make it through COVID. I don't know exactly why, what did him in, but when I see this, it makes me sad. But at the same time, I feel so privileged to have got to know him and have some of his artwork in my house.
I find that last name very interesting. Is that something that would be passed down through families, just like last names are in our culture, or is that something that would have been more recent?
The Whiteman name was actually a traditional name with the Cheyenne, but there were times when some of them, when they were the Bureau of Indian Affairs, would put them on the new rosters. Some of those people weren't quite as friendly and gave some derogatory names that are not traditional names.
With the idea of traditional, this was a photo that I was interested in, the traditional dress that they seem to be wearing.
And these are Cheyenne ladies at a powwow, and they're getting ready to go in and do the women's dance and show their traditional garb and show some of the traditional dance moves that were passed down through the years.
I'm guessing a lot of this would have been handmade.
All of it.
All of it would have been handmade.
Well, I mean, the cloth, and then they do all the beadwork. It's just amazing. The Plains tribes are known for their beadwork, where if you go down the southwest, you get into the silver and turquoise, but the Plains, the beadwork is phenomenal.
And this is a photo that is special to you, and you can tell that there's some fun going on.
Yeah, this is my friend with the black hat, this Dennis Limberhand. He's one of my best friends in the world, and one morning we were having breakfast, and this is Gilbert White Dirt there. He was telling us a joke, and the Cheyenne are famous for telling a story, then all of a sudden they hit you with a punchline, and you didn't even know it was a joke, and we just about fell out of our chairs on this one. So, and this is the last photo in my book, and I wanted to end with a smile, so that's what I did.
So besides your photographs, which you have designed very carefully to speak for themselves, do you have any parting thoughts that you would like to leave with our audience?
There was a verse from a Willie Nelson song that came off of an album released in 1975, Red-Headed Stranger. And this verse has pretty much grounded me and kept me focused through the years. goes like this. At a time when the world seems to be spinning, hopelessly out of control, there's deceivers and believers and old in-betweeners that seem to have no place to go. Well, it's the same old song. It's right and it's wrong. But living is just something that I do. Living is just something that I do. Thank you. If you have any comments or would like to reach me, you can reach me at gregrustphoto@gmail.com.
Thank you.